Welcome to another edition of Real People, Real Voices. I'm your host, James Jackson.
I'm your co-host, Pastor Wayne Moore.
Always a pleasure to host with you.
It is. We're in this new year, and Real People, Real Voices is off to a great start. Pray that the community will continue to watch and support and also become a part of the show.
Yeah.
By getting in touch with our producers, getting the information that you can be on the show with us. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, and we're looking for sponsors. We'd love for you to become a sponsor for the show. You can do that by sending us an email. You can send the station an email. You can get a hold of Faith McKinney and become a sponsor. We do want to thank our sponsors we have already.
Right. We want to thank, let's do it in this order. Stewart Mortuary, who helps us with our bereavement throughout the city of Indianapolis. We pray that you'll never have to use them, but if you do, pre-needs is there, and as well as immediate need at the Stewart Mortuary.
Yeah, Lee, Castle, and Crawley, attorneys at law. If you need help, they can help you.
And we also have the Fervent Care Christian Academy with over 170 children already enrolled, trying to reach a goal for 2018 of 250 children.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we hope that you'll be a part of that in making Fervent Prayer Christian Academy grow.
Yeah, give them a call at 317-898-2751. Again, that's 317-898-2751. Also want to encourage you to go to our YouTube channel, WHMB TV 40. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can watch this show when it's over. Also, shows that you might have missed. A lot of great information.
Yes, a lot of great information. And this show today is going to be among those.
It's going to be a powerful show.
We have a young lady here from the government by the name of Darlene Sedwick. She's going to give us some information about accommodations in the workplace, for religious accommodations, and I'm ready to hear this.
So refresh your tea, put an extra packet of stevia in your coffee. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real People, Real Voices. I'm your host, James Jackson.
And I'm your co-host, Pastor Wayne Moore.
And we're joined today. I'll let you introduce our esteemed guest on today. She's a member of your church.
Yes, she's a member of my church. She's very active in our church. She's what I would consider one of the Olivet Baptist Church's stalwart members, and a great mother, great wife. She's here today to talk with us about accommodations in the workplace for religious purposes, and she is with the, let me do it the right way, Deputy Director of Diversity and EEO Division of the United States Custom and Border Protection. She's here today, the Honorable Darlene Sedwick.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So kind of share with our viewing audience a little bit of what your responsibility entails.
I have served with the federal government for roughly 34 years. And 30 years of that has been in the area of civil rights in the employment arena. And my office is responsible for addressing all civil rights needs in terms of discrimination. If employees feel as if they have been discriminated somehow, they come to my office in order to lodge those complaints. Our office will adjudicate those complaints. We will investigate them. We will, address issues and concerns with management officials. And then we also get involved in, as in the topic today, needs of our employees as it relates to either disability accommodations and or religious accommodations in the workplace.
And have you all seen an influx in folks putting claims in?
Employment claims of discrimination, maybe not an influx, but a steady. There is a steady number of complaints that are being filed, and certainly in the current environment that we're in with sexual harassment, we are definitely seeing claims of that nature. So unfortunately, we've not been put out of business in that regard.
Yeah, and before we get deeper into talking about Title VII, if someone who's watching has a complaint, a couple of questions. What is considered to be a viable complaint? And then what is the first step they need to take?
Well, The first step, I would say, in terms of addressing the complaint, if an employee or an applicant for employment believes somehow that they've been discriminated against, and it has to be based on an impermissible element of Title VII, and that would be based on their race, their color, their sex, their gender, national origin, based on their religion, and there are a few other elements, their age. If they believe somehow something has happened to them related to their employment or to their application for employment, then they need to seek out either from their employer, if they're in the federal government, or from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission if they're in the private sector. They can reach out to them and they can file a complaint making an allegation of employment discrimination.
Success rate of complaints that are filed?
Findings of discrimination is what we refer to them as. Many times, and it's probably different, I don't have those stats here today of overall rates, but the good news is those things are public. And most, all federal agencies are required to report that information on their public website domains. It's a part of what we call the No Fair Act, and so they have to report number of complaints and their findings of discrimination. Most often, when an employer sees that there is some potential liability, they will work towards resolving that issue with that employee. So it may result in a settlement or some type of agreement to rectify or to remedy that individual with regard to whatever their claim is. However, very few, it's very difficult and a very, very narrow piece of the law to actually prove discrimination. It's very seldom that you have direct evidence. In other words, someone acknowledging or admitting or that they've actually engaged.
That will never happen.
Right, but then again, we always encourage our employees to hold one another accountable. And if you see something, say something. This bystander effect that, well, it's not affecting me, so I'm okay. We want employees to support one another when they see something that's wrong, and that's called corroborating evidence.
How does Title VII work?
Title VII
Is work accommodation in the workplace?
Well, Title VII is part of the Civil Rights Act.
Okay.
It prohibits, as I said before, discrimination based on various elements: race, color, sex, religion, national origin, age. But specifically with regard to religion, there are 4 elements under that category of religion. Title VII prohibits an employer from discriminating against an employee based on their religious beliefs and or practices. It also prohibits an employer from refraining or refusing to hire someone who does not have the same religious beliefs that they have. This extends to employers, employment agencies, and unions, because in some sectors, unions are an employer as well. So it extends to anyone who has any element of or piece in deciding whether or not you get hired or whether or not you are retained. It also requires an employer to consider accommodation, a religious accommodation of one's deeply held religious beliefs or lack thereof. And that's always, that's the balancer. Whether you have religion or whether you don't, it protects everyone. And then it also says you cannot retaliate against an individual because they have religious beliefs and or they practice it and or because they ask for a reasonable accommodation in order to exercise those practices and beliefs.
Can you give us an example of reasonable accommodation?
I sure can. Let's say you are a member of your church and there's a conference or convention that's coming up, you hold an office, and it's through the week, and you need to take off for that particular week, but you're on the schedule to work. Perhaps your employer offers you the right to take personal time or leave for that. And then, leave. So leave can be a form of a religious accommodation. It could also require you an employer to consider changing your schedule or your shift. I work for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. We are a law enforcement agency. We are 24/7, and so we never sleep, we never shut down. There's always something going on at the borders. There's always something going on in one of our ports of entries throughout the United States. And we have many employees, some of which, practice varying faiths. We have had situations where we've created shifts in order to accommodate an individual's religious practices. For example, they may be Sabbath day worshipers and, are precluded from working from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And so our normal shifts don't necessarily accommodate that, but we have had to consider, all of those different dynamics and offer that form of an accommodation.
All right, we're going to take a break right here. Stay with us. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real People, Real Voices.
I'm Pastor Wayne Moore, and this is James Jackson.
And we're joined today by Ms. Darlene Sedwick. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
And we're talking about religious accommodation. We're talking about Title VII. Does an employer have to grant every request by an individual who may have something that they want to do as it pertains to their religious organization?
That's a very good question. And the answer is no, they don't. An employer is required to consider the request. They are required to explore what the actual needs are of the employee. But there is a provision in the law that says if the granting of an accommodation request creates an undue hardship, then the employer does not have to grant it. Many times employers will work with their employees to try to come up with an accommodation, but there may be the occasion where the employer cannot actually grant it at that time. For example, if an employee has a religious tenet of their faith that requires them to pray at a certain time of the day, and they need to, let's say, pray for 10 minutes. And in the case of my employer, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, let's say it's a Customs and Border Protection officer, and there's a flight that has arrived that has to be inspected. You've got passengers, you might have, luggage, and that flight is on schedule, but you are, one of 5 Customs and Border Protection officers in a small port of entry. The employer should permit you to pray as long as it does not create an undue hardship on the impact of the operation. And so, in that scenario, the employer may say, I can't allow you to do it right now because this flight has come in and we have to inspect these passengers and to be able to move them on their way and to be prepared for the next flight that comes in. So on that particular day, at that particular time, the employer may not be able to grant that request. So that would be an example of when an employer may not be able to grant a request.
Most challenging part of your job?
I don't know that I would call it challenging. I think the most frustrating part of my job is that I find every day that people don't know what their rights are. And as employees, employees have rights, applicants have rights. And so I think this type of outreach is something that's important. We get very few requests from churches to come and talk to their congregants about, you know, what their rights are. Many times we feel that because we're scheduled to work on Sunday, we have to show up. And yes, we should. We should show up. But there may be an occasion where you want to attend your church service, and the law says that you have a right to ask to be accommodated in order for you to exercise
And let's
that.
just drill down right there, because 30% or more of the workforce is working on Sunday, and it appears to me that a lot of churches are accommodating people's work schedules. But what I'm hearing you say is that if people really want to be at church,
They can exercise
they have
their
a right to be there
They have a right to ask.
without getting fired.
That's right. They have a right to make the request, and they have a right for that request to be heard. And in many instances, employers, you know, can accommodate an employee. And so, you know, it could be, you know, that someone doesn't care to attend a church service on Sunday, but they're scheduled to work on Saturday. You know, allow those two employees to swap. Simple things.
It's really communication among your workforce.
It really is. It really is.
I think that's phenomenal. I think that, but to be able to, like, I have to agree with her when she said that a lot of people don't know their rights, and people have lost jobs because they did not know their rights.
Right.
And I think our churches need to be in a position now to try to get people to hear what happens as it relates to accommodation in the workplace. Some of you pastors out there can probably contact Ms. Sedwick, and she probably could do a workshop or something for you that will help your members understand what it means to be accommodated in the workplace. And that's serious, because we have, like you say, 30 to 40%.
Yeah.
And we accommodate, you know, our parishioners more so than we lean on employers to accommodate.
Yeah.
You know,
Spiritual formation is so critically important, especially in the 21st century.
Oh, think about this. Employers oftentimes will pay employees extra money, double time on Sunday, and there's a reason for that. That's you know, in large part because this provision does exist, and so you know there's an enticement to even work on Sundays. You know, and employers recognize you know that the law says that you know that typically, and there you know again you may be a Sabbath day worshiper, but you know, it's all in the same vein that, you know, employers, you know, will pay you more money in order for you to.
lucre.
Right.
All good money's not good money. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So it, you know, and jobs are too hard to come by, you know, in this day and age. And so, you know, everyone needs to be able to remain employed, take care of their families, take care of their just debts. And you shouldn't have to quit a job because they continue to require you to work on Sunday. Now, you know, going into a position, sometimes you have to make a decision.
You have to negotiate that.
Yeah, well, or make a decision. Is this, you know, job going to allow me, you know, to the flexibility of working on Sundays? Sometimes you go into an employment situation where you didn't have to work on Sundays, and something changed.
Yeah,
So these provisions are there for you.
I worked in manufacturing for many of years, and as long as I have been in ministry, and there were times I was on mandatory. I was on mandatory Sundays, and I went to my employer and told him that you can put me on mandatory, but I won't be able to be here because I have religious obligations. So I went to the union, and the union helped my supervisor see what my role was in the religious community, and I had no problem with that. They would allow me, because of religious obligations, to leave to maintain some things in the congregation. I was blessed because I had communication with that supervisor, and they yielded me privileges to do what I needed to do as it relates to being a minister in the community. I appreciated that.
And Ms. Sedwick, where can people go look at their rights?
They can go to eeoc.gov. That's the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Their website has a wealth of information. I would highly encourage, if you're curious about any topic, to include religious accommodation and every other aspect of Title VII and employment discrimination, go to their website. That's www.eeoc.gov.
Well, thanks for being here.
Thank you for
You've been a
having
great
me.
guest.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you all for being with us, too. We still have the rundown, so stay with us. We'll be back after this. Well, welcome back. I'm James Jackson, your host.
And I'm Pastor Wayne Moore, your co-host.
And I'm Faith McKinney, your executive producer.
Certainly want to thank Lee Kossel and Crowley, attorneys at law, for their sponsorship.
Yeah, and we want to thank the Fervent Care Christian
Care.
Academy.
And Stewart Mortuary.
Yes.
Final arrangements and prearranged.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Meeting the community's needs in bereavement.
and speaking of community needs, Ms. Sedwick shared with us some valuable information with regard to accommodation. I thought it was really good, and it's interesting to know that people actually have rights with regard to if they want to be at church, they can be without getting fired.
Right. If you can avoid living without that triple time on Sundays,
Well, that is enticing. I've never heard it put that way before.
Yeah. Triple time money has a tendency to pull you away from worship.
It
Pull you away
sure
from
does.
the Lord.
Yeah, it will do it.
The Lord
will do it.
understands.
Yeah. No, he does not understand.
That's what they say. That's what they say. The Lord understands.
No, he
Is that what
does
God
not.
said? He said he
Yeah,
understands.
I think we had a great segment with her. I think it was phenomenal. She said she's going to come back and give us some more information.
I think she should.
Yeah, in some other areas. She's come down to our level, and we ought to appreciate that.
Yeah, she did a great job.
Very good.
Yeah.
Faith, is that something that is interesting to you as well, religious accommodation?
Religious accommodations, of course. I've always worked
On
Sundays. I have worked on Sundays for many years, but I was fortunate enough not to have to work on Sundays. But yeah.
Well, this Sunday you can be off.
Right.
And you can come to church.
Come to church. You
We'll
go
see
back.
you next time on Real People.
Yeah, go to church Sunday.
Okay.